I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I should have seen it coming, but I was too comfortable, too trusting. My wife, Emma, and I had been together for 10 years, married for 8. We had 2 kids, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and what seemed like an idyllic life. People always said we were the perfect couple, the kind you envy. But like most illusions, it wasn't real. There was something wrong beneath the surface. A kind of darkness lurking, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. It started small, subtle changes that I could explain away if I tried hard enough. She began staying late at work more often than usual. Just a busy season, she'd say with that tired smile. Her phone, once left lying around without a second thought, was now always in her hand or locked away in her purse. She'd laugh quietly at text messages late at night, but when I asked who she was talking to, her answers were vague, non-committal. Just the girls, or, it's work stuff, you know how it is. At first, I ignored the sinking feeling in my gut. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. I didn't want to start a fight over what could just be my overactive imagination. But doubt crept in like a slow, creeping fog. It settled in the pit of my stomach and made itself at home, lingering, whispering that something wasn't right. I told myself not to be that guy, the one who goes snooping, who doesn't trust his own wife. After all, she had never given me a reason not to trust her. Or had she? The final straw, though, came one evening when Emma was getting ready for yet another work dinner. I was watching her from the hallway as she stood in front of the mirror, putting on her makeup. She was more meticulous than usual, taking extra care with her eyeliner and lipstick. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her dress, one I hadn't seen in years, one she knew I loved. "You look amazing," I said, stepping into the room. She smiled at me through the mirror, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a hollow smile, one that masked whatever was going on inside her head. "Thanks," she said, brushing off the compliment too quickly. "It's just a work thing." A work thing. That phrase had begun to feel like a dagger in my chest every time she said it. The way she threw it around so casually, like it explained everything, only deepened my suspicion. I tried to shake it off, but as she kissed me goodbye and left the house, that familiar knot of anxiety twisted tighter in my gut. This time, I couldn't let it go. Something inside me snapped, a breaking point I hadn't realized I was approaching. I needed to know. I waited until she was gone, then walked over to where she had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. My hand hovered over it for a moment. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound filling my ears. I was about to cross a line, but I had to know. I couldn't live in the dark anymore. I picked up her phone. It was locked, of course. She had changed her password a few weeks ago, a small change at the time that had barely registered. Now, it felt like a giant red flag. I stared at the screen, trying to think of what her new code might be. My first guess was our wedding date. Wrong. Then our oldest child's birthday. Still wrong. On my third try, I guessed her mother's birthday. Bingo. The phone unlocked, and suddenly, her whole world was open to me. I scrolled through her messages, heart in my throat, trying to stay calm. Most of the conversations were innocuous, texts with her friends, her mother, even a few work-related chats. But then I found a thread with someone named Nick. At first, it seemed like work talk. They exchanged a few emails about projects, meetings, the usual office stuff. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages became more personal. Flirty. A joke about her outfit one day, a casual mention of how much fun it was to grab drinks after their last work meeting. It felt like my stomach dropped into my shoes. My hands shook as I kept scrolling. The messages were all there, plain as day. They'd been meeting for months, laughing behind my back, sharing moments I was supposed to have with her. I found myself reading through conversations where they talked about me, how she felt trapped and bored, how Nick made her feel alive again. Alive? I thought we were happy. I thought we had it all. It got worse. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. There were explicit messages, vivid descriptions of their encounters, the hotel rooms, the moments they spent together. She had lied to my face so easily, so casually, and I hadn't seen it. Not once. I wanted to smash the phone, to scream, to throw something. But I didn't. I forced myself to keep reading, to let the truth sink in completely. It felt like time had stopped. The more I read, the angrier I got. But even through the fury, I knew I had to be smart. If I confronted her right now, she'd twist it, gaslight me, make me feel like I was overreacting. She was good at that, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong, the one who was paranoid and insecure. I couldn't let her win that game. No, I needed to be patient. I put the phone down, taking a deep breath to steady myself. I needed a plan. Revenge was the only thing on my mind now, but it couldn't be reckless. It had to be methodical, calculated, and devastating. I couldn't let her walk away from this unscathed, not after everything she had done. She needed to feel the betrayal I felt now, the way it hollowed out my chest, left me aching and furious. I spent the rest of the evening sitting in silence, trying to calm the storm inside me. She came home late, slipping quietly into bed beside me. I pretended to be asleep, but I felt the coldness in her touch, the distance between us. My wife, my whole life, was a stranger now. And I was going to make her regret every single lie. The next few days were torture. I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine, all the while watching her, waiting for the right moment. She had no idea what was coming. She laughed with me at breakfast, kissed the kids on the way out the door, but I saw the truth in every glance she gave her phone, every hurried text she sent while pretending to be busy. I didn't confront her. I didn't shout or accuse. I smiled and played my part because I needed more than a fight. I needed the perfect opportunity to expose her, to ruin her just as she had ruined me. And then, the chance came. It was a regular Wednesday evening when the perfect opportunity fell into my lap. Emma came home excited, her usual guarded demeanor replaced by something I hadn't seen in a while, anticipation. I could tell from the way she floated around the kitchen, humming as she pulled ingredients out of the fridge, that something was up. She hadn't told me yet, but she was bursting to. "What's going on?" I asked, leaning against the doorway. "You're in a good mood." She smiled at me, a genuine smile this time, but it felt hollow now. Everything about her felt fake. "Oh, nothing," she said, too casually. "There's just this little dinner party at work this weekend, and I thought maybe we could go together." I raised an eyebrow. Emma rarely invited me to her work functions anymore. Over the past few months, she'd started going alone, claiming it was easier to network without me there, that spouses were optional. But here she was, all but insisting I attend this one. "Really? You want me to come?" I asked, masking my suspicion. "Yeah," she said, too quickly. "It's going to be fun. Everyone from the office will be there, including Nick. You should meet him." Nick. There it was. The reason behind her sudden enthusiasm. She wanted to parade me in front of him, to flaunt her double life, the life where she was still the loyal wife with the loving husband and adorable kids. It made me sick to think about it, but it also gave me an idea. This dinner party could be the perfect moment to put my plan into motion. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "I'd love to go." She looked relieved, as if she had expected me to say no. I could see the wheels turning in her head, probably imagining how this would play out. She had no idea what was coming. For the next few days, I stayed calm, keeping everything under wraps. I made the usual small talk, laughed at her jokes, played with the kids, just the typical husband stuff. I even complimented her when she picked out a new dress for the party, though I knew she was probably buying it to impress him, not me. I played my part so well, she didn't notice a thing. Behind the scenes, though, I was busy. I dug deeper into her messages, compiling everything I needed into a neat little folder on my laptop. Screenshots of their texts, photos I had taken of them together on one of their work dinners, and even a recording of a phone call where she told Nick she wished she could spend more time with him but had to keep up appearances at home. I rehearsed the timing in my head over and over, thinking of how I'd reveal it all in front of her colleagues, her friends, and most importantly, in front of Nick. I wanted to destroy the facade she had so carefully built, piece by piece. And I wanted to do it publicly, where she couldn't hide. The night of the dinner party arrived, and Emma was buzzing with excitement. She spent hours getting ready, curling her hair, applying makeup, and slipping into her new dress. It was a deep red, tight enough to show off her figure but classy enough for the occasion. She looked beautiful, and it made me hate her even more. How could she betray me like this, yet act like nothing was wrong? "You ready?" she asked as she appeared at the top of the stairs, a picture of perfection. I forced a smile, nodding as I adjusted my tie. "Yeah, let's go." The drive to the restaurant was quiet, but not awkward. Emma chatted about work, about some new project she was involved in, but I barely listened. My mind was on what I was about to do. I had my laptop in the trunk, waiting for the right moment. The plan was simple: wait for the perfect time when everyone was relaxed, comfortable, and then, drop the bomb. I'd plug my laptop into the restaurant's projector, which would be displaying a slideshow of the company's accomplishments throughout the evening. A quick switch, and everyone would be staring at the evidence of her affair. We arrived at the restaurant, a fancy downtown spot that the company had rented out for the evening. I followed Emma inside, where we were greeted by her colleagues and their spouses. Emma introduced me to everyone with that same charming smile she always wore at these events. As we mingled, she introduced me to Nick. He wasn't anything special. In fact, he looked exactly like the kind of guy you'd expect to get involved in an affair with a married woman, tall, in decent shape, but with a slimy edge that was hard to miss once you were paying attention. He shook my hand, all smiles, and I wondered if he knew I was the husband he was screwing over. Probably. I could see it in his eyes, the arrogance of someone who thought he was getting away with something. We sat down at the long dinner table, and the evening progressed just as I had expected. People drank wine, chatted about work and life, and I watched Emma from across the table as she laughed and smiled, pretending everything was normal. Every time Nick made a joke, her eyes lit up in a way that used to be reserved for me. It made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. The moment I had been waiting for came halfway through dinner. The restaurant staff dimmed the lights, and the projector at the front of the room came to life, displaying the company's logo as the CEO, Jack Edwards, stood up to give a speech. Emma leaned in, whispering in my ear that this was the part where they'd show a slideshow of the past year's accomplishments. "Should be fun," she said with a smile. "Yeah, I'm sure it will be," I replied, my heart pounding. As Jack started his speech, I slipped out of my seat, excusing myself to the restroom. But instead of heading for the bathroom, I walked to the small control booth in the corner of the room where the AV equipment was set up. The staff barely noticed me as I plugged my laptop into the system, quickly overriding the slideshow with my own files. I set it on a timer, giving myself just enough time to return to my seat before the real show began. I took my seat beside Emma, who barely noticed I had been gone. Jack finished his speech, raising his glass in a toast to the company's success. The lights dimmed further, and the slideshow began. For the first few seconds, it was the usual: photos of the office, employees shaking hands at conferences, smiling faces at company retreats. But then, the screen flickered, and everything changed. The first text message between Emma and Nick appeared on the screen, projected for everyone to see. I watched as confusion rippled through the room. People squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Emma, sitting beside me, didn't notice at first. But when the second image popped up, another text, this one more explicit, she froze. "What the?" she muttered under her breath, her face draining of color. I said nothing. I just watched as the third image appeared, a photo of them together, taken just a few weeks ago, sitting too close at a bar after one of their meetings. Gasps echoed around the room. People started murmuring, pointing at the screen, realizing what was happening. I could feel Emma stiffen beside me, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes darted around the room, panic setting in. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" I turned to her, my expression calm. "Isn't it obvious? This is your life, Emma. Your little secret, out for everyone to see." Her hand flew to her mouth as more photos flashed across the screen, more messages detailing her betrayal. Nick, sitting a few seats down, was staring at the screen, wide-eyed, his face pale. He knew what this meant. Everyone knew. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The room was silent now, everyone too stunned to speak. I looked down at Emma, whose eyes were filled with tears, her hands shaking. "This is who you are," I said, my voice steady. "You wanted to live a double life. Well, now it's all out in the open." And with that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her to deal with the fallout of her lies. I didn't look back as I walked out of the restaurant that night. The sound of hushed whispers and shocked murmurs faded behind me as the door closed, leaving Emma to face the consequences of her betrayal. My heart was pounding, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, but underneath it all, there was an odd sense of calm. I had done it. I had exposed her in front of her colleagues, her lover, and the people she respected. Now she had to live in the wreckage of the life she destroyed. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just unleashed inside. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, breathing in the air, trying to steady myself. I had planned for this moment for weeks, and now that it had finally happened, I wasn't sure what to do next. Part of me had expected to feel a greater sense of victory, but there was only emptiness. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the shattered trust, still hung over me like a dark cloud. I pulled out my phone and called a cab. My hands were steady, and I felt oddly detached from the whole situation. It was done. The cab arrived within minutes, and I climbed in, giving the driver directions to a hotel downtown. I had already planned this part out. There was no way I was going home that night. Emma could have the house. I wasn't ready to face her again, not yet. As the cab drove away from the restaurant, I let my thoughts drift. The evening had gone almost exactly as I had imagined. The look on Emma's face when she realized what was happening, when she saw her secret life displayed for all to see, had been everything I hoped for. Her eyes had filled with panic, her hands shaking as she tried to grasp the full weight of what I had done. For a split second, I had felt a surge of satisfaction. She deserved this. She had brought this on herself. But now, as the adrenaline wore off, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness creeping in. I had spent weeks obsessing over my revenge, carefully planning every detail, but now that it was done, I felt hollow. I had been betrayed by the person I loved most in the world, and no amount of revenge could fix that. It couldn't erase the damage she had done or bring back the trust she had shattered. The cab pulled up to the hotel, and I paid the driver before stepping out. I checked in at the front desk, trying to push the lingering thoughts out of my mind. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and all I wanted was a few hours of sleep to numb everything. The receptionist handed me my key, and I made my way to my room, the sterile silence of the hotel lobby pressing in on me. Once inside the room, I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. The reality of it all began to settle in. I had just blown up my marriage. Not that there was much left to salvage, but still, it was over now. The family we had built, the life we had shared for so many years, it was all gone in an instant. I glanced at my phone, half expecting a flood of messages from Emma. But there was nothing. No calls, no texts. Maybe she was too ashamed, too stunned by what had happened to even try to contact me. Or maybe she was still at the restaurant, scrambling to explain herself to the people who had just witnessed her humiliation. Either way, I didn't care. Not right now. I couldn't face her. I tossed the phone onto the bedside table and lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept replaying the events of the night over and over, like a broken record. The images of Emma and Nick together, the messages, the way she had smiled at him while I had been left in the dark, it all played out in my head, taunting me. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. The room was dim, the early morning light filtering through the curtains. I rubbed my eyes and reached for the phone, half expecting it to be Emma. It wasn't. It was my attorney. I sat up, my heart pounding again, and answered the call. "Mark, it's James," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I just wanted to check in. Did everything go as planned last night?" "Yeah," I said, running a hand through my hair. "It did. I think it went exactly how I wanted it to." James was quiet for a moment, and I could sense the unspoken question hanging in the air. He knew what I had been planning, knew the lengths I was willing to go to expose Emma's affair. But he also knew what this kind of revenge could cost. "You ready to move forward with the divorce?" he finally asked. The word hit me like a punch in the gut. Divorce. It was inevitable, of course, but hearing it out loud made everything so final. There was no turning back now. I had exposed Emma, burned every bridge, and now the only thing left was to end the marriage for good. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Let's do it." James went over a few details, the logistics of how we'd proceed, the paperwork that needed to be filed. I answered in autopilot, barely listening. My mind was somewhere else, lost in the swirling mess of emotions that had been building since the moment I found out about Emma's affair. After I hung up with James, I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. I should have felt relieved. I should have been ready to move on, to start the process of leaving all of this behind. But instead, I just felt tired. Tired of the lies, the deceit, and now, the aftermath. I got up and splashed some cold water on my face in the bathroom, hoping it would wake me up, shake off the fog that had settled over me. But it didn't help. The reflection staring back at me in the mirror looked as lost as I felt. By the time I left the hotel, it was nearly noon. I didn't go straight home. I couldn't. The thought of seeing Emma, of facing the ruins of our life, was too much. Instead, I drove aimlessly for a while, not sure where I was headed or what I was trying to escape. Eventually, I pulled into a park. It was quiet, mostly empty except for a few joggers and dog walkers. I parked the car and got out, needing to clear my head. I wandered down one of the paths, my hands in my pockets, the cool breeze rustling the trees around me. I kept thinking about our kids. They were young, too young to understand what was going on. And I hated the thought of them being caught in the middle of this mess. No matter what, I knew I had to be there for them. They were all that mattered now. Sitting on a bench, I watched as a family passed by, a couple with two small children, laughing and chasing each other. I wondered if they knew how fragile it all was, how easily it could break. They seemed so happy, so secure in their little world. But I had been there once, too. I had thought we were happy, thought we had everything. The truth was, I didn't know what the future held. The revenge had been satisfying in the moment, but now, in the aftermath, I felt adrift. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done. All I could do now was move forward, figure out how to rebuild from the ashes. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find some peace on the other side. The days following the dinner party were a blur. I went through the motions of meeting with my attorney, filing the necessary papers, and taking care of the kids while keeping everything as normal as possible for them. I barely saw Emma. After the public humiliation at the restaurant, she had retreated into herself. She stayed in the guest room, and we barely exchanged more than a few words. The kids didn't seem to notice the tension between us, but I could feel it building like a pressure cooker about to explode. I kept waiting for her to say something, to confront me, to apologize, or at least explain. But she didn't. Days turned into weeks, and still, she remained silent, tiptoeing around the house like a ghost. Part of me wanted to force the conversation, to make her admit what she had done, to hear her say it out loud. But the other part of me was exhausted, worn out from the whole ordeal. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. I glanced at the screen, feeling a sudden rush of anxiety. We hadn't exchanged more than a few words in weeks, so why now? Can we talk? The message read. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. There was a part of me that didn't want to hear whatever she had to say, but another part of me, the part that still wanted answers, couldn't resist. Yeah, I typed back. Let's talk. She came downstairs a few minutes later, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She sat down across from me, nervously wringing her hands in her lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavy, suffocating. I'm sorry, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, my jaw tightening. For what, exactly? She flinched at the harshness in my tone, but I didn't care. She deserved every ounce of anger I felt. She took a deep breath and tried again. For everything, she said, her voice trembling. For lying to you. For Nick. I'm so sorry, Mark. I don't even know how it got this far. I stared at her, feeling a wave of disgust wash over me. You don't know how it got this far. You were having an affair for months, Emma. That doesn't just happen. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care. She had broken me, shattered everything we had built together, and now she was acting like it had all been some kind of accident. I know, she whispered, wiping her eyes. I know I messed up. But I never meant to hurt you. I don't even know why I did it. You didn't mean to hurt me. I laughed bitterly. How else was this supposed to go? You thought you could just keep sleeping with him and I'd never find out. Her lip quivered, and for a moment, she looked like she was going to break down completely. But then something shifted in her expression, something dark, something I hadn't seen before. There's something you don't know, she said, her voice steadying. I narrowed my eyes. What could possibly make this worse? She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking down to her hands before meeting mine again. It wasn't just an affair, Mark. It wasn't like that. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? She hesitated, looking down at the floor as if gathering her courage. Then she spoke, her words slow, deliberate. I never wanted to be with Nick, she said, her voice shaking again. I didn't love him. It wasn't about that. I stared at her, not understanding. Then why the hell did you do it? She closed her eyes for a moment, like she was bracing herself for what she was about to say. Because I had no choice. I felt the anger rise up in me again. What the hell are you talking about? She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. Nick was blackmailing me. The room seemed to spin for a second, and I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. Blackmail? That made no sense. Emma had never mentioned anything like that before. What do you mean, blackmail? I asked, my voice quieter now, but still laced with disbelief. He had something on me, Mark, she said, her voice shaking. Something from years ago, before we were even married. I made a mistake, and he found out. He threatened to ruin everything, my career, my reputation, our family, if I didn't go along with it. I stared at her, my mind racing. This didn't feel real. What kind of mistake? She looked away, shame flooding her face. When I was in college, I got involved with a group of people I shouldn't have. There were drugs, parties. One night, things got out of hand. There was an accident. Someone got hurt, and I was involved. It wasn't my fault, but I was there, and if anyone found out, it could have ruined me. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I had never known this side of Emma. I had never imagined that she was carrying this kind of secret. And Nick knew. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. He found out. I don't even know how, but he had proof. He said if I didn't keep seeing him, he'd go to the police, to my boss, to everyone. I didn't know what to do, Mark. I felt trapped. I sat back, my mind reeling. Everything I thought I knew about her, about the affair, was unraveling in front of me. The betrayal was still there, but now it was tangled up in something darker, something more complicated than I had imagined. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice cracking. I was scared, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I thought you'd hate me. I thought you'd leave me if you knew the truth. And I thought I could handle it on my own, that I could keep it from blowing up our lives. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. She was broken, just like me, but in a different way. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. But in that moment, I saw the fear in her eyes, the weight of the secret she had been carrying alone for so long. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the truth settling between us like a dark cloud. I didn't know what to say, what to think, or how to feel. The woman I had loved for so many years, the mother of my children, had been living in a nightmare I hadn't even known existed. Finally, she spoke again, her voice small and fragile. I understand if you want to leave, she said. But I needed you to know the truth. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the storm of emotions swirling inside me. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, they were still there. But now, there was something else too. Something like pity. Something like understanding. When I opened my eyes, she was still sitting there, waiting for my response. I didn't know if we could ever fix what was broken between us. But I knew one thing, the story I had told myself, the simple narrative of betrayal and revenge, had just been shattered. And now, nothing was simple anymore.